How's everyone doing? Good. I always have to adjust this because height reasons. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program featuring Edward Ayers, author of American Visions, the United States 1800 through 1860. I'm Kalela Williams. I know many of you, and I don't know many of you, so I'm really excited to see everyone who I know and meet the folks who I don't. I'm the director of the Virginia Center for the Book, part of Virginia Humanities. We're a department of Virginia Humanities. Many of you know the Center for the Book for our Book Arts program, which is right downstairs with our letterpress studio, or for the Virginia Festival of the Book, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. But speaking of the festival, I am delighted to be working with two of our festival partners, and the first is, of course, the beautiful venue that we're in today, and that is the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center, who have been just such great partners with us, and we're so delighted to be here in this space, in this historic space, which really speaks to what we're going to, well, different periods, but we won't get nerdy about it, but it really speaks to what we're here to talk about, which is history. Yay! And I'm also really excited to be working with New Dominion Bookshop, who is selling books in that room back there. So after the program, please join them and purchase books. The holidays are coming up, and I know a couple of people who are buying books for their dad or themselves. So the Virginia Center for the Book also hosts year-round programs, and we're trying to do more of these in-person year-round programs. So again, very excited. And I'm an enthusiast of history and a fan of the former podcast Backstory, so I'm really thrilled that Ed is joining us. It's kind of like, ooh, fangirl. But here to introduce him is Matthew Gibson, who is the executive director of Virginia Humanities.
Thanks, Kalela, and good evening, everyone. So Virginia Humanities is the state's Humanities Council. While we're based here in Charlottesville, we carry the profound, I think it's the profound, responsibility to bring the humanities to all Virginians and make it a part of public life across the Commonwealth, not just here. Over the next few years, as an organization, we as a nation, we'll be celebrating some pretty big anniversaries. Next year, Virginia Humanities will turn 50. And in 2026, these United States will turn 250. These two anniversaries are much more connected than the separation of 200 years might suggest. After all, our nation's founding, in my estimation, was and remains an ambitious and imaginative humanistic experiment, born out of ideas and ideals, no matter how imperfectly conceived at the time, of human freedom and equality. In the founding legislation that created the National Endowment for the Humanities in 1965, and eventually Virginia Humanities in 1974, we understand the tie between these two foundings much more explicitly. Democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens, the legislation goes. It therefore must not limit its efforts to science and technology alone, but must give full value and support to the other great branches of scholarly and cultural activity in order to get a better understanding of the past, a better analysis of the present, and a better view of the future. I can't think of a better scholar, teacher, and spokesperson who connects both the past and the present, but also helps us to prepare for some kind of future as seamlessly as our speaker this evening, Ed Ayers. Edward Ayers is Tucker Boatwright Professor of the Humanities at the University of Richmond, where he's President Emeritus, and where he's Executive Director of New American History and founder of Bunk History, two digital resources which seek to make history accessible to everyone. In 2013, President Barack Obama cited what he called Ed Ayers' quote, commitment to making our history as widely available and accessible as possible, end quote, by awarding him the National Humanities Medal. Over 4 decades of work of writing history, experimenting with digital scholarship, collaborating in public history, and teaching and leading in higher education, Ed has worked to find new ways to connect the public with the American past. And in that work, many of you might remember Ed as a host, as Kalela said, of Virginia Humanities podcast Backstory. He served on a number of national and state commissions and boards, including Virginia Humanities. And tonight we're going to hear him talk about his new book, American Visions, United States, 1800 to 1860. American Visions explores key elements of American life, politics, and culture between 1800 and 1860. This book explores a pivotal period in our country's history with events and voices that have moved through history to shape who we are today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ed Ayers.
Great to see everybody. If I were still a professor at UVA, I'd give extra credit for skipping a basketball game to see this wonderful event. Since I'm not a professor, I have no extra credit to give. I'll just give you my thanks, along with Virginia Humanities, Jefferson School, and New Dominion. It's touching. No, I can't. Of my many talents, I could actually do that. I don't know what. Do I need to repeat all that? You could hear. Just thank you. That's what it was. And a lame joke. There will be more of those to come, probably. So nothing missed there. So I call this book American Visions. And what do I mean by that? Imagine paths between the way things are and what they might become. And to a remarkable extent, the visions that have defined the United States appeared in the first two-thirds of the 19th century, when everything seemed to be in the future. Americans of all kinds fashioned words by word a new nation, a vocabulary to describe the new nation taking shape before their eyes. People were thrown together with almost no controlling power other than their own appetites and restraints. Much of what the United States became and remains crystallized in those three generations. Now, not to pick a fight with Matthew, who just gave me a generous introduction, but actually I think we're in agreement that those founding documents were kind of drafts for a nation. It was these three generations of the 19th century that first determined what those words of democracy, equality, freedom might mean. That's really what our talk tonight is about. Now, the nation has faced no more fundamental questions than it faced in these decades. What power government had over slavery? What right a powerful majority has to dispossess people of ancestral land? What right does a republic have to provoke war against another republic? What political, legal, and civil rights might women possess? What rights free black citizens might practice? What the limits of legitimate protest might be? And what people of faith might do when confronted with fundamental wrong. This book tries to expand the story of the new nation, while we have built new ways to expand the ways that we can see that story. We're going to start seeing various screens across the way. I want to welcome those who are live streaming or watching this later. We're trying to invent new tools to reveal more dimensions of the interwoven stories we're trying to tell. Annie Evans, who's sitting over here to my right, is the Director of Education and Outreach for New American History. And she's at the keyboard, making things happen here. And she works with teachers and students across the country every day to try to see if there might not be new and better ways to explore the American past. Charlottesville's own Journey Group has helped us build this project and our others. And the guiding principle of New American History is that we trust teachers. That teachers know how to teach history. They don't need to be told by heavy bureaucracy. There we go. And we also trust students, whose natural curiosity should be encouraged and not limited. Now, people generally know the outlines of the story of the early U.S., but we forget how remarkable it was. It seemed impossible in 1800 that American slavery would spread over an area the size of continental Europe in only 60 years. Few white people imagined that native peoples could sustain their cultures and contest the power of the new generation, of the new nation for generations to come. Only the Mormon devout believed that their church, born in upstate New York, would grow into a global faith. Few would have imagined that centuries later, the most widely repeated phrase in the world would be okay. A typographical fad born of a failed political campaign in 1840. And people would not have imagined that we would still remember the tune to "Oh Susanna," and that school children would learn about some weird guy named Johnny Appleseed, or that Moby Dick, Walden, and Leaves of Grass would come to stand as the defining literary works of the era. A poll would have shown no one would have known these things in 18. So, as a result of this uncertainty, this confusion, we've settled on familiar stories to tame this confusion, the complexities of remembering and forgetting. Our textbooks and exams commonly describe these tumultuous years as the age of Jackson, or the rise of the common man, or maybe it's the era of inevitable expansion, or maybe it's the benign Second Great Awakening, and the greatest euphemism of all, the antebellum era, defining lives of generations for an event that had yet to occur, avoiding calling this the time when slavery tormented the lives of millions of people and risked the fate of the nation. Today, some people like to claim that we're imposing our own values when we invoke ideas of justice and equality in this new nation. The white people of the past, they claim, simply did not know, could not know, that black people or women or immigrants demanded their full humanity. This is profoundly wrong. The visionaries of the early United States were not trapped in the innocence or blindness of a simpler time. In every decade between 1800 and 1860, they did everything within their power, and sometimes beyond it, to claim America's expressed ideals as their own. Individuals dismissed for their skin, or their sex, or their peculiarity, spoke for an America of freedom and connection, of possibility and responsibility. Black Americans' voices were woven into and often led a chorus of voices demanding that the United States live up to its claims. They spoke before white Americans awoke to the great wrongs being perpetrated in their names. Some of those names became famous, but others did not. Gabriel, Paul Cuff, Denmark Vesey, David Walker, Nat Turner are well known. But black women too spoke up, unbidden, but no less passionate and eloquent. In 1831, for example, Maria W. Stewart, a young black woman in Boston, warned that, "Oh, America, America, foul and indelible is thy stain. Dark and dismal is the cloud that hangs over thee for thy cruel wrongs and injuries to the fallen sons of Africa. The blood of her murdered ones cry to heaven for vengeance against thee. Thou art almost become drunken with the blood of her slain. Thou hast enriched thyself through her toils and labors, and now thou refuseth to even make a small return. The day of justice will come, Stuart warned, for it is the blood of our fathers and the tears of our brethren that have enriched your soils, and we claim our rights." This is 1831, so it's not taking long for people to say we're already falling away from the recently expressed ideals of the Declaration of the Constitution. By the early 1830s, a few white people dared to join black allies. We know Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator, largely supported by free black subscribers, but there were others. An accomplished and popular white author of household guides and magazines for children, Lydia Mariah Child, at the age of 28, had done something that virtually no woman in America was allowed to do, which is to become famous and self-supporting. But she was influenced by The Liberator, and she pivoted to write a comprehensive attack on slavery and defense of black people. She read widely, she confronted her own prejudices and assumptions, and in 1833 she published an appeal in favor of that class of Americans called Africans. Child warned her fellow white Northerners that they could not, quote, "flatter ourselves that we are in reality any better than our brethren of the South. The soil and climate of the North prevented slavery from taking root there, but the very spirit of the hateful and mischievous thing is here in all its strength." She scoffed at the fear of social intercourse between the different colored races. Black men, she assured white men, had no interest in marrying your daughters. Should white people, she asked sarcastically, quote, "keep this class of people in everlasting degradation for fear that one of their descendants may marry our great-great-great-great-grandchild? We made slavery, and slavery made the presidents. No Christian," she says, "who questions his own conscience can justify himself in indulging the feeling. The renewal of this prejudice is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of duty." Family and friends immediately abandoned child for these words. The Boston Athenaeum removed her library privileges. Parents canceled their subscription to the Juvenile Miscellany, which soon ceased to publish. Her book would be central to the abolitionist cause for the next 30 years. The child and her husband would struggle with debt and poverty for years to come. They tried to establish a farm where they grew sugar beets rather than depending on the sugar cane tended by enslaved hands. Native Americans, like Black Americans, spoke with disdain and outrage of the injustices they suffered in the new United States. The movement to end slavery and to stop Native expulsion spoke to one another in a new American language that combined the moral certainty of religious faith with the secular certainty of the Declaration of Independence. William Apis, descended from both Pequot and white ancestors, gave voice to the Native people of New England. He was a devout Methodist, and he traveled throughout New England, preaching to audiences of white and Native and Black people, fusing the language of Christianity with respect for the humanity of indigenous people. He became friends with many in the free Black community of Boston. In 1833, the same year that Mariah Child published her book, Apis published An Indian's Looking Glass for the White Man, imploring white people to reflect on the value they placed on what he called skin, on color. In the world of nations, Apis reminded them, white people constituted but a handful. Yet if all the peoples of the world came together in one place, and each skin had its national crimes written upon it, which skin do you think would have the greatest, he asked. Apis gave white people a clue. Can you charge the Indians with robbing a nation almost of their whole continent and murdering the women and children and then depriving the remainder of their lawful rights that nature and God intended them to have? And who had robbed African people to till their grounds and welter out their days under the lash and hunger and fatigue under the scorching rays of a burning sun? Apis confronted his readers with the words of the religion they shared. Did you ever hear or read of Christ teaching his disciples that they ought to despise one because his skin was different than theirs? Unlikely allies joined in. In 1836, a white woman from Charleston, South Carolina, self-exiled to Philadelphia, Angelina Grimke, spoke directly to the people of her gender, race, and region in her appeal to the Christian women of the South. She offered Christ's fundamental teaching. Whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do you even so to them. She then asked every slaveholder to apply these queries to his own heart. Am I willing to be a slave? Am I willing to see my wife a slave of another? Am I willing to see my mother a slave, or my father, or sister, or brother? If not, then in holding others as slaves, I am doing what I would not wish to be done for me or any relative I have. And thus, I have broken this golden rule, which was given me to walk by. It became clear to Grimke, quote, to every reflecting mind that slavery must be abolished. The air in which we live and the light which is overspreading the whole world on our subject clearly shows that the time cannot be distant when it will be done. The only question is how slavery would end, by moral power or by physical force. It was up to the white South to choose. When her appeal reached Charleston, city officials burned it publicly. Grimke's mother was warned that her daughter must never visit her native city again. In the North, in 1840, Henry Highland Garnet, only 24 years old, authored a statement for a convention of the colored inhabitants of the state of New York. At that convention, 134 men from 33 counties issued an unequivocal demand for the political rights. We lifted up our voices for the restored spirit of the first days of the Republic. The first days of the Republic, within memory. These black citizens asked for no vested rights, for no peculiar privileges, for no extraordinary prerogatives. Instead, they appealed for their Republican birthright that had been stolen from them when a property qualification disfranchised most black men. Like other missionaries, these men took the United States at its word. You'll notice there's no alien language being applied here. They're just saying, this is what we said we are we? Now, text and images define the country at the time of this critical formation, and this is where you see the humanities in action. This is a very humanistic book in which I've tried to show the power of the humanities then and now. And we're going to show this is like the story map that Annie and a colleague at Richmond have made that gives you some idea of the scale of what I'm talking about. The invention of Davy Crockett and his posthumous almanac to the image-drenched election of 1840 when OK emerged. In fact, it's hard to imagine. There's a big debate about whether a 67-year-old man was too old to be president. The whole thing said, if you just give him some hard cider and a log cabin, he'd be satisfied. That's where that, talk about miscalculations of political marketing. He won. He did die almost immediately, but that's that's where it came from. To the last circumnavigation of the globe in sailing ships and the creation of what became the Smithsonian Institution, to the popular accounts of seafaring by a promising young author named Herman Melville, to the romance of the Oregon Trail written by a husband and wife team of the Fremonts, or the Book of Mormon, published in upstate New York in the face of protest, to the invention of the electric telegraph by a failed artist, to the notion of manifest destiny in the war of Mexico, when courier knives first emerged as purveyors of imagined war scenes, which all the soldiers did exactly alike. But there was much more. The early 1840s also offered popular guides to contraception, debates over women's rights, the treatment of the mentally ill, the writing of one of the most popular novels of the century about a secret cabal in Philadelphia, and one of the most popular poems in American history about haunted memory and a bird. The failed efforts of a young writer in Massachusetts who would turn his eyes to a single pond to reveal the natural world. The emergence of Frederick Douglass as an unrivaled voice of justice. The mass popularity of an abolitionist singing group turning the strategies of blackface minstrelsy against caricature. And efforts by white Southern Christians to defend slavery through appeal to the Bible. Now, when the U.S. claimed that it should, that's all in 7 years. People imagine, well, the past, not much was really happening. It's kind of a simpler time. I don't think we can name 7 years in our own time when these many profound things happened. When the U.S. claimed that it should possess North America as its God-given right and responsibility and go to war with the Republic of Mexico to claim that right, critics saw right through the absurdity of such claims. A newspaper sneered as that such political claptrap as so-called manifest destiny, along with a second snare word, Anglo-Saxonism. If anything was wanted to prove that this age is an age of imbecility and false philosophy, it is furnished in this drivel about races. Race, the senator from Illinois. The Anglo-Saxon race and the Celtic race and this race and that race seem to be the latest discovery of the present time to account for all moral, social, and political phenomena. This new theory is founded neither on Christianity nor philosophy. So from the very first time that scientists are claiming that race is a biological fact, people are saying, nonsense, it is not. So there was never a time that went unchallenged. Other Americans defended the rights of women. 1848, the Declaration of Sentiments produced in Seneca Falls, New York, framed from the beginning. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. We used to believe that there was a time the cult of domesticity ruled and it was sort of unchallenged that women were of a different species. Everywhere I look back in this era, I'm finding women saying, that's nonsense. Let me show you. And in churches, fraternal organizations, reform bodies, black women and men made allies, and in particular called for equality. The masthead of Frederick Douglass's North Star proclaimed, right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. The first voices in American environmental thought emerged in these years. Susan Fenimore Cooper and George Perkins Marsh wrote with love of the American landscape, but they also warned of exfoliation and recommended changes that farmers could make to slow the destruction of woodlands and of the warming of the climate. 1847, Marsh gives a speech in which he says, everybody knows that the climate is getting warmer because of all these fires that we're building, all the trees we're cutting down. But this is not a recent discovery as well. Female authors such as Margaret Fuller and Fanny Fern cast aside constraints to write bold and iconoclastic works that ridicule notions of innate characteristics of men and women. Writers and artists dared to confront America in all its complexity and confusion. They celebrated freedom of thought and expression. They experimented boldly, no more than Virginia's own Edward Ayers. Yes, Virginia's own. I visited all the places where he lived. This is weird. The very shape and subjects of their works were visions. Bold, iconoclastic, unlikely. Brave trials to see what American culture might look and sound like. America is a poem in our eyes, Ralph Waldo Emerson proclaimed. Its ample geography dazzles the imagination and will not wait long for meters. What women rose to Emerson's challenge? He wrote poetry for everyone, of everyone. There was no formal scheme to bind the words, no arcane or foreign vocabulary, no allusions to classical works that only the educated would know. He composed lists in no descending or ascending order. And to read Whitman was to walk on the streets and docks of New York in the 1850s, to see without judging, to celebrate oneself as a way of celebrating all selves. Sex was capacious for Whitman, with love for men and women, for touch as well as devotion, for longing as well as fulfillment. He accepted it all, was grateful for it all. He worshiped the everyday. I see something of God each hour of the 24 and each moment in it. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and everyone is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that others will punctually come forever and ever. In the meantime, even in the midst of these democratic visions, slavery ate away at American life, culture, and politics like a cancer. By the late 1850s, Americans had consumed themselves with contempt for one another. No words were too harsh to say, no assault in the halls of government too extreme. The political system fragmented under the pressure. Bigotry against immigrants won offices, while the Democrats viciously turned on one another, opening the door for a new Republican Party that would win the presidency with less than 40% of the vote. In the chaos, frozen out by the major parties, the opponents of slavery mobilized in any way they could, politically and culturally. Some white people began to develop what Frederick Douglass called sympathies for the slave. Douglass even saw promise in the sentimental songs of Stephen Foster, rendered first in dialect, but beginning to move toward universal feelings. Paintings by William Sidney Mount and Eastman Johnson, reproduced and displayed by the thousands, portrayed black Americans with dignity and pride. The black artist who painted the portrait of Cincinnati that I've adopted for the cover of American Visions, Robert J. Duncanson, trained as a house painter and then taught himself to paint, won commissions in America and even more in Europe and Canada. Harry Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, Henry James recalled, was his first encounter with grown-up fiction. It was less a book than a state of vision, of feeling and consciousness in which people, actual people, walk and talk and laugh and cry. A young black woman, Frances Ellen Watkins, spoke across the North to raise money for the Underground Railroad. She evoked sympathies for the slaves in ways that men could not, in ways that white people could not, in ways that prose could not. Her poem of 1858, Bury Me in a Free Land, spoke with the voice of a woman begging not to be buried where slavery would. This is a powerful video that worked a moment ago.
Make me a grave where'er you will, in a lowly plain or a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I'd shudder and start if I heard the bay of bloodhounds seizing their human prey, and I heard the captive plead in vain as they bound afresh his galling chain. If I saw young girls from their mother's arms, bartered and sold for their youthful charms, my eye would no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves.
So this is one of 5 videos that we commissioned from Field Studios in Richmond that have this filmed at Columbus, Williamsburg, and we have others that filmed in Richmond and the Eastern Shore that try to connect young people, make them realize this actually happened. These were actual people who wrote these things and had these thoughts. And so I hope you get a chance to look at the other 4, which are powerful as well. And listen to Watkins. One audience member wrote, "There swept over me in a chill wave of horror the realization that this noble woman might have been sold on the auction block to the highest bidder." By the late 1850s, the new nation lacked the resilience to weather the long building crisis that threatened to engulf everyone and everything. No one could find the language to imagine a union that was not divided. Americans had exhausted their goodwill, patience, trust, and empathy over the preceding decades. They had consumed themselves with vituperation so that the only honest language seemed the language of resentment and distrust, of cynicism and suspicion. Fantasies of violence suffered and inflicted filled imaginations. The network of partisan newspapers and telegraph lines and political patronage spun over the preceding decades amplified bitter rhetoric into every American community. Americans bluffed and boasted and threatened themselves into a war no one wanted. As that war came and hundreds of thousands died, people sustained visions that eventually redeemed that war with emancipation. Even though they were attacked for being unrealistic and unpatriotic, these men and women held true to ideals of equality, fairness, and the rule of law when the political system had become corrupt and broken. That's my effort to distill the book. It took me a while to write into a few words. But you can see from the things that we're showing that this is a part of a project that is designed to be kind of a network of imagination, especially hoping to reach young people, but other people who have a hard time picturing antebellum era as anything other than the stereotypes. Now, teachers and historians and literary scholars and art historians and archivists and librarians and supporters of the humanities work every day to keep the words and art and music of this American past alive. BUMP is the sister project of New American History, and it every day curates the ways that American history appears in the media. And so this is today's. This looks different than it was earlier when I looked at it. You can see all the different themes that are coming from different places, some unreliable Ed Ayers, but others are from places that you can actually trust. Slate, Alice Obscure, which you may not have heard of in United History. And now there are over, I think, 15,000 articles in all of this, woven into the original sources, and they're all tagged by teams of trained and talented young people at the University of Richmond. Looking at those ways I'm going to show how this is. Just scroll down the beginning, and here we go. And we see there are all these different ways of seeing when history is alive every single day. I imagine this when I was teaching first-year students and realized they had no idea that history wasn't just that boring stuff in that textbook, but was the living, breathing fabric of our lives every day. So BUMP shows that the people, the issues, events of the new nation continually recur. They're touchstones for our understanding of ourselves. So go ahead and do a search, Andy, for, let's do it while we're figuring this out. Just not something let's see how we might do it. Yeah, well, well, okay, there we go. You probably finished the rest of it. There you go. Let's think about it. There we go. 66 articles. Should all want to be canceled. Okay. So now you've got all these different articles and put them together to see how this quote that I gave you might resonate today. Sure. And it's all geographically located as well, so everything that we're looking at. I'm going to show the map and the So, and I told you the videos that we've made, the black men who are mobilizing for the vote, William Apex traveling to yet another church, Susan Fenimore Cooper writing a meditation on the environment, groundwork, Emerson calling for the American poetry. The other thing that we do is that we connect to all the original sources that I used to write this book. There are 100 of them. And using the Internet Archive, the Library of Congress, because right now we give kids like a paragraph with lots of ellipses before, in the middle, and afterwards, and say, this is what it is, and it's not. Here, go look at Walden yourself, and see the pattern, search it through the Internet Archive. So this goes back to the idea of trusting kids and trying to unleash their curiosity. Annie's written, she writes learning resources that weave all these things together. She's written a cool one about having ChatGPT read Walden, and then also read a travel account that I wrote about Walden. And then you can see all of this, and it would be for kids to think of what's gained and lost if I have a computer do my homework. How do things look differently if it's actual human writing? So, and another thing that we've done is, as part of this project, my wife and I traveled the country in 6 journeys over the course of 2 years, much of it a small RV named Bertha, covering 60 sites in 24 states. And we found history of this era all around us, protected and interpreted and improved by people like our host here tonight, who speak to diverse audiences every day. You may read my voluminous reports from the field, illustrated by sometimes photographs that show just how foolish I would have been. But together, the book and its companions share a message. We can have both forthcoming honesty about our past and inspiring heroes. But we need better heroes. People who confronted the injustice of their own time with American ideals of equality, compassion, justice, and tolerance. There are more such heroes than we might think, and they are more compelling than we would imagine. So that's the talk part of all of this, but the part I want to do is turn the lights up and talk with you all about what you think. Yeah, awesome. We have to leak all that. So let's go look at that. Yeah. Oh, microphone. You like that microphone. I got you. Who'd like to go first? Yes, over to the left. Nancy.
Yes, Nancy. So this is great. So you must have already met with resistance. Have you?
Not yet.
How come? They don't know?
Yeah, the book's only 2.5 weeks old, so we'll see. I would say that the book, in many ways, the whole project was written. We were very active, Annie and I both, in the discussions over the history standards that you know about. We worked on the African American History Education Commission and helped with this. And I spoke in naive terms at the very first meeting before I knew that there was going to be resistance to this, about how history is about inquiry. It's about questions. It's not about answers. And I was shocked to find that they disagreed with me. That no, history is about answers, and we're going to hold teachers and schools accountable for knowing those answers. And so then I spoke to him again, wrote op-eds and said, no, really, please. There are better ways of teaching history than this memorization stuff and anything that would fit on a multiple choice test. Is set people's imaginations free. And it's also the little thing that I said at the end, that the true heroes should be those who confronted the challenges of our time, not those who pretend they didn't happen. You know, one of the things I discovered is that they're happy to celebrate Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, but kids have no idea of why these people would risk their lives to resist slavery if they don't know what slavery was. Right? So the video you saw is meant to, I don't care how old you are, you can imagine, okay, that was powerful. So we'll see if resistance comes. In some ways, this is post-resistance. It's to the other side. I would say this, that we've sort of been divided in recent years between people who identify the truth about American history as being harsh and bad, and people who defend proper history as being celebratory. And I'm trying to say that's a bogus distinction. That's not the way that history happened or the way that we need to do it. It doesn't mean you're less patriotic if you acknowledge that 4 million people were held in perpetual bondage for 200 years. Maybe you're more patriotic if you confront that and then say, but people didn't just take it. They were constantly resisting. So I'd say the resistance was kind of front-loaded, and I'm trying to say, I'm going to grant your goodwill. But listen to these voices. Doesn't this suggest to you that we don't have to have this dichotomous version of the past? So, but now I won't be able to sleep, Nancy, thinking about all the people who are going to resist it. I was thinking that I triumph over all resistance by being so...
Today what you said was really inspiring, so try to think that rather than resistance.
I'm just kidding. Thank you very much. I have imagined if the Wall Street Journal reviews it, what they would say. Is this just more woke history? Is this political correctness or whatever? It's not. If you look all 100 sources, right? I'm not making this up. This is the history that happened, and this is what people said about it. And it's not us passing judgment on them. It's us learning from them. We're listening to these marginal people who had spoke without permission, who spoke the truth. They have lessons to teach us. Sorry, that'll teach you to say something to me. I won't give such long answers every time. Who else we got? Yes?
First of all, thanks for all you do for teaching history. You're just great. But I wanted to know if, by working on this book on visions, it made you more or less optimistic about the future of our republic.
I'm sure you were able to discern the very subtle comparisons that I was drawing between them and I hear other people laughing, but they also saw. What I tell students is that things that are far better than you can imagine can happen. Because I grew up in the segregated South and watched that fall away before my eyes. But things that are much worse than you can imagine can happen too if you're not careful. And I feel that we're talking now as if all of this heated language and bluster doesn't have consequences. It does. And so, you know, a backstory, our joke was always every piece had the same thing, which was that, God, I know things are terrible now, but the past was terrible too. And it was. But it was never all the story. There was always somebody else. So, in all honesty, this is a message to all of us to say, everything's not politics. Okay? There are sources of strength and humanity that are coursing through our society right now. And chances are that they're not being identified on the front page. And in the same way that nobody had an idea that these books were going to be considered the great books of America when they only made $500 in royalties at the time, or you know, Thoreau had, said, I have a library of 800 books. Unfortunately, I wrote 700 of them myself. That's not a hint about the New Dominion sale. So if I say that we had to be honest about the past, we have to be honest about the present too. But do I believe that there are sources of progress that are not evident to us right now? Do I think there is some 19-year-old person right now who's going to do something great? I do. I'm hoping maybe they can be inspired a little bit by saying, yeah, it's not always recognized at the time, and sometimes you're shoved aside, and sometimes people will ridicule you, But if you're speaking the truth, it has a way of working its way to the surface. So the book is meant to be inspiring, especially for young people who might think that there's not a place for me in this kind of country. You know, that this culture seems to be cruel and turning against me. But I have things to say. So a lot of these people are strange. You know, I've wondered what, you know, if I met Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, you know, and I love them for it. You know, and I think we need to celebrate strangeness a little bit more. We celebrate peculiarity a little bit more. So I'm optimistic because if we had the choice to be optimistic or not, I'm going to choose to be optimistic. Am I alarmed by what I read every day? I am. But fortunately, I figure if people held in bondage, or the half the population that suffered under subjugation of unjust laws can maintain faith in the country, so can I. What else we got? Thank you. So far, these are very welcome questions. Does anybody have any? There we go. I should have actually taunted. Pray. That's not really a challenge.
Maybe something a little lighter. I was just going to add, you said you actually got to choose your cover, which is somewhat unusual by itself, but what about that image was interesting?
Well, it's not really at its best right now, the light shot. I think if there was a center of America at this time, it was Cincinnati. On the river between, this is painted on the Kentucky side, an enslaved man in the foreground, and all the smoking factories driven by steam power. They're already talking in Pittsburgh about everything's covered in soot because of one of the things that happens here is the discovery of fossil fuels in my period, the first oil wells and all this. So it's meant to be, here's somebody looking at sort of the past and the future, the South and the North, slavery and freedom at the same time. And this is a man who said, I'm going to be a painter, even though I have no training or customers, I'm just going to do it. And he did this, and then an abolitionist in Cincinnati painted him to paint murals in his house. He was the first one, early Americans to have murals. And then people like that so much, he goes to Europe and becomes a star. So it's meant to be 1851, Robert J. Duncanson. This particular one, it's not in a museum or it's not on display, but you can see him at most of the major museums in the country. I'm a big fan of Thomas Cole and all of these painters who are imagining an America that is, let's look through all the stuff we've just been talking about. Where does truth lie? It lies in nature. And he's a kind of a kindred spirit of all that. So that's a long answer to your question. Thanks for the 2 thumbs up. What else we got? Yes? I like the way you're distributing yourselves to get maximum perfect mileage.
So you used a phrase about this period saying that it was kind of working off the provisional documents of what we call the founding period.
Yeah.
And I think about the 1619 project kind of turns that and says, well, let's look at the founding from that perspective. And there's a recent book about looking at it through Reconstruction and the amendments that were passed during that period as well. That's when the U.S. really got founded. Is there ever a founding date for the United States? And
What did I just say? I said it was my period, didn't I?
Well, you always make that argument. What's the founding from this period?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. I didn't use the word founding for this period. It is a period of, if you want to think about the period that embraced the most of what followed, I would say this. I've written about Reconstruction and argued that, and I've written about the evolution of enslavement. But this is the very borders of the country, the very shape of the nation. They invented basically the two-party system that's not hardwired in. They participated in the expansion of the largest, most powerful system of slavery in the modern world. They claimed the continent from native inhabitants. They basically invented American literature and music and art. So I think, you can look back and say, the 14th Amendment, thank goodness we have that. But if you want to think about when did all of this come together and sort of then combust because of the contradictions that were built into it, I do think it was this period. Now, I've never written about this period before, and one reason I did it is like, how did it end up producing Moby Dick and Leaves of Grass and all this? And the more I looked at it, and I kept pushing the date back, because there's other books about this that are 900 pages long. They go from 1815 to 1848. Others stop at 1850. Nobody actually looked at all 60 years of this. And I looked at this and I said, oh my goodness, this is when the United States was created that we have. So I think that those, it's job security for historians to have debates like this. No, and I'm speaking of the founding. But I would say this was the culmination of what began in 1619, which brought its demise. Is the most important thing that ever happened in American history. That's not in this book. That's other things that I've written. So I didn't know at the beginning that's what I thought, but as I looked at it, I said, there's almost nothing that we have now. And the telegraph is a far more powerful invention than the internet. You think about and the locomotive, a far more powerful invention than the jet. Before this, you could move exactly as fast as a horse or wind. Now, instantaneous transformation. So we're used to thinking about the transportation revolution technology, but I'm suggesting that the entire culture itself was invented. So the people who argue to the contrary aren't in this room, and so they lose. That's what I think. All right, what else we got? Another? Is this a self-policing? Yes, there we go.
Yeah, it seems as though you've emphasized slavery and the oppression of African Americans and so on as a really big thing, and certainly it was. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the dispossession of the native population, the expansion westward, the sort of idea of a colonial settler state. Is that a big deal in your book?
It is. It's a massive part of the book. And the book begins, as it does, with Tecumseh, Tenskwatawa, and Black Hawk, and it tells all those stories. And on the travel journal that we go to, we visit places all across the United States where that took place. I think that one reason that I'm emphasizing the voices against slavery is they actually had a chance to be heard in a way that many of the voices against native dispossession did not. So Black Hawk's autobiography, about the same time as William Apess, becomes a bestseller, and he says, do you have to have everything? Is there no limit to your creed? So people are at and the Trail of Tears and all of that. So yeah, it's a big thing. Goes back to your point about 1619, and a phrase that I've actually used, of slavery being the original sin of this nation. Well, there's two original sins: native dispossession and enslavement. You could not have the Cotton Revolution without the millions and millions of acres that were taken in the South by Andrew Jackson. So the very last place that we visit on our tour of 15,000 miles was the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And from that, 20 million acres come from the creek. And so I celebrate all the places we visit, but what we've not been able to do yet, there's no place that actually puts those two stories in conjunction as what enables everything else, and then the War with Mexico. So it's funny, because instead we talk about expansion, right? The nation's expanding, but how is it expanding? So you're exactly right, there's much about native dispossession in there, but also much about Native peoples themselves. So, I saw Ned Black Hawk just won the National Book Award for his book, The Rediscovery of America. I benefited from a whole wave of new scholarship about everything that I talk about. I didn't know any of this when I started reading about it all the revolutionary work that's being done on every front. And so I tried to say, well, what would a person who kind of lives in the 19th century but is not an expert on any of these things, how might we put it together? And it took me, there's many tens of thousands of pages that have never seen the light of day, that at lunch I thought, now I've nailed it. I was wrong. And so anyway, I do believe that the three things we just talked about, viral expansion of slavery, the dispossession of the continent, and the war with Mexico against a fellow republic, defined this era, and people at the time knew it, and they lead to the Civil War.
Thank you.
Okay? Is there time for one more question? Or as many as you want to ask. I'm having fun. I'll do this again.
I'm really fascinated by this travel that you did, and I'm curious how that evolved. Did you have some, did you sit, I love to travel, and you know, I sit down and I used to make all those plans and have it all lined out. But I'm wondering if that's what you did, or did it evolve? And what was the most inspiring place that you visited, and why?
Yeah, so first of all, we factor in the person I mentioned being my wife. And hey, hon, how'd you like to be trapped with me in a small box for weeks and weeks? And she was game for it. So we took 6 trips. The first down to Charleston, stopping along the way at famous places like the James K. Polk birthplace. And that was part of it. Along the way, I said, I never wrote anybody to say we're coming. I never said to anybody, hey, I'm a historian too. Can I talk to the boss? I just wanted to see what Americans could see in all these places. And so we did that, then we made a big loop through North Georgia and the middle of Tennessee to Hermitage and back through Kentucky. Then we made a big loop through upstate New York and New England. Then we made a loop through the Midwest, all the way to the Great Lakes. So we visited from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. And then this last trip, we went from Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma again, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Alabama, and that last thing. So, in the map, so you can see all the places, and just roll over any one place. So you can see each of these places. So there is Cincinnati, and it will give you the story that I wrote about it, and you can take it and see about all that. So there was an influential book written in 1992 called Lies Across America. And he went to all these places to see what kind of nonsense was being foisted on the American people. We went to all these places, and I was struck by the dedication of people all the way from volunteers to National Park Service to telling the truth. There's been a revolution in the last 20 years about telling a more inclusive history everywhere we went. I'd say that, and it's a little frustrating, places after we went there, they opened there's a new African American museum in Charleston after I wrote an essay saying, well, this is really inadequate. At the Alamo, where there's still the Phil Collins collection. You know Phil Collins from the 80s. Since he was a boy in England, he's been collecting Alamo stuff, and he created a collection, and they built a building around it. And it's all every kind of projectile and knife that you can imagine. No mention about what the battle was about or anything. But there's a $400 million center being built nearby that's going to tell it. So we went to the Museum of the First Americans in Oklahoma City, brand new, that's telling the story of the 34 native nations that were driven to Oklahoma and so forth. So, but we went to lots of little places too that were nobody else went to. And my takeaway is that something I knew, the people who do public history are a special kind of saint. They're out there on the front lines explaining something hard to people who just show up, some guy in an RV who's taking too many pictures of every single sign and exhibit we have. What's going on with this guy? That are dedicated to telling the truth about their small part of America. So my takeaway is that. Now, I would say that you asked what was the most inspiring place we went. I'm afraid the answer is a cliche, but it was true, which was Walden Pond. We were there in September, and it was warm enough for us to put our feet in the water. And you can see the place where he built this little house. We measured it. It was 30 square feet smaller than our RV. To do all that. So I hope you'll get a chance to. I hope you get a chance to look at some of these. But the whole idea would be, there's no one place that you can see this. I would say this, that you can't go to the Smithsonian and see a coherent story about this period. I didn't know that was the applause line. But the point being is partly because this era doesn't have a name. I'm trying to call it the era of the new nation. Okay? It's not antebellum, it's not expansion, okay? It's when they're figuring what the heck is this place going to be, and all these things are in play. So, the punchline of all this is we need a book. If we just had a book that would explain how all this fit together, what a gift that would be to the American people. But anyway, so all the pieces are like a beautiful mosaic. Each fragment is beautiful, but we haven't put the pieces together yet. You folks are very patient. I'm so grateful for you coming tonight. I'd again thank our three hosts for hosting us. Hope that you'll explore these things. Everything that Annie's showing you is free, and we don't ask for any kind of sign-in. We don't ask. There's no political agenda. We're just thinking we've got this cool, incredible resource of the internet with all kinds of video and the original sources of everything that you can imagine. Wouldn't it be better than feeding it down through a very tight multiple choice test? So that's what we're. So thank you all.